Welcome to MSP Confidential. It's Friday, June 14th, and we're here once again for our weekly live stream. And today I have the pleasure of welcoming a dear friend, Mr. Tim Coach, Global Channel Chief. How are you, Tim? Good to have you, man.
I am doing wonderful. It is a sweltering hot day here in Kansas as our temperatures continue to increase. And I think once I'm done here, there may be some pool time in my future.
Well, the day started off pretty gloomy here in Vancouver, not very promising at all, and has actually started to open up a bit. I see some glimpses of blue sky, so we'll see if maybe turns for the better. But, you know, I kind of always lived with this comfort around the gloomy weather and the gray skies. People that talk about the Pacific Northwest often reference a bit of that half of the year being gray and rainy and all that stuff. And I don't know, maybe it doesn't affect me so much, but are you a kind of weather-driven person for the most part?
I am a non-cold weather-driven person. I don't like the cold, so my son's got about a year left, and then he's done with high school, and I'm headed south. But I'll tell you, I spent a lot of time in Seattle in probably the mid '90s, and I just loved it there. I mean, the rain doesn't really bother me. Of course, I don't live in it nonstop like they kind of do, but just I mean, and Washington as a whole, and I'm sure you experience this somewhat, is like half of the state is super lush and super green and beautiful. And then when you head over to the Gorge, which is this giant outdoor amphitheater where they do a lot of concerts, man, it just gets like desert dry out there. So I really like Seattle. I really like the Pacific Northwest. I think it's a beautiful country, and I think the rain is what leads to it being like that.
Yeah, man. I think, I've been going up almost on 30 years here in Vancouver. It's just kind of, I don't even think about it anymore. And then the few nice days in the summer always make you forget. about the crappy rest of the year. I feel like that's a good paradigm for life. However, you kind
Mhm.
of these couple things that happen that were great kind of give you that hope to sort of reset for many months or years of enduring pain and suffering. But I don't know, it's maybe the part of the human condition. But it's so great to have you, man. We saw you this week at PAX 8 Beyond. We were all hanging out in Denver. It's good to see you. And you're kind of in between gigs at the moment. And so I think you may have felt a little out of place, not having a booth to man, not having any responsibilities, just kind of chilling, having conversations. What was that like? I've never felt that in my life.
I can't tell you how strange it was not to be coordinating booth time, coordinating staff, being at booth time. Like, luckily, the interaction is still there. Our industry is one that's very friendly. You can stop in the hallway and talk to anybody. So a lot of great conversations, but just the non hustle, the
Mm-hmm.
not I got to be at the booth. I got to make sure everybody gets fed before we get to the booth. I got to make sure that the hanger isn't a real thing, right? I got to, all this prep work that you normally do as you're going into this. It was just not there. I mean, the visiting was great. Don't get me wrong, but it's like, man, I just can I step into somebody's booth and help? Free
Well,
labor.
I did see you having loads and loads of conversations. You and I caught up. In fact, we ended up talking about barbecue for the most part. And in the description of the video, I thought I was giggling a bit as I was writing it when I was posting the session for today because I kind of had this idea. I wonder if there's like any parallels between the predilections that people in Kansas City have for barbecue and IT. And so as one does in today's day and age, I threw it into ChatGPT, and so of course ChatGPT had some ideas. I don't know if people can see this, but ChatGPT thought there were some interesting parallels between barbecue preferences in KC and the practice of IT. Variety and specialization. Certainly, we see a ton of that in the IT industry. And ironically, like you have sometimes MSPs talking about how they're very vertically focused, very specialized in a niche, and you hear schools of thought around this idea that you will do much better in a specialized niche versus sort of a generalized approach to multiple verticals and so on. Of course, if you were in the food and beverage vertical, then you kind of change your mind about that around COVID. But what are your thoughts on MSP specialization, and have you seen any unique differences between the two models?
Oh, like we could talk barbecue or MSP here. Which way do you want to go?
Well,
Um,
this is the
yeah,
MSP Confidential show, and you worked at an MSP at one point. So maybe sprinkle the IT commentary with some barbecue. How's that?
yeah,
With some barbecue
absolutely.
sauce.
So what you find is just like the MSPs. I mean, Kansas City barbecue, along with the MSP, is it's very different, right? I mean, according to the area. So Kansas Cityans are very snobbish towards Kansas City barbecue and kind of that sweet stuff, right? Where so very siloed into we like this barbecue, and then not much of the others. But then you get us within Kansas City, and there's 20 different restaurants, these small hole in the walls, these famous ones, and it varies between there. But from the MSP perspective, I think what you see, and I'd be interested on your thoughts because I know you spent some time in the MSP world as well, is you start out in a broad, like I'm going to support anything and everything, right? And I talk about the price pyramid all the time, meaning the base of you're really supporting this massive amount of just anything and everything to start getting those funds coming in, start to build your business. And then what you find is as you mature, as you find peer groups, as you find various uh, partnerships with other MSPs to grow and mature yourself, the bottom of that pyramid really starts to come in. And that's where you start seeing specialization, whether you're talking about you're going to be, you're going to do banking, which I have a heavy background in MSP support for banking, or you're going to do law firms, or you're going to do dental firms, right? And once you really bring that bottom in to get that consistency going, then what you see is, for me, you see that price point really drive up, which is where you start getting into your more mature MSPs. And once you got one silo down, then you can typically just with a few changes replicate that over a few other silos. that really help you get that price point up. So you kind of lock in on what you really like. Same thing with barbecue. You know, here in Kansas City, pulled pork is our bologna. That's what we feed the mass, right? But you want good barbecue for us, it's brisket, it's ribs, it's sausage, it's all the other stuff.
I guess Linksys WRT 54 would be the equivalent of the pulled pork. I think, there's maybe a concurrent effort that MSPs go through, of course, the stack standardization. And I think it was interesting to see, especially since I was deep in the documentation era with IT glue and all that stuff, how it became painfully evident how difficult it was to document when you're managing, 10 various firewalls across your multiple clients, as opposed to just having to document the process for one. And of course, that translates into many other operational challenges because training, 10 staff on 10 firewalls is literally 10 times, potentially more, the effort than having everybody obviously learn one platform. And so what ends up happening is you end up creating bottlenecks of expertise inside the shop. And I think that just is a recipe for disaster. I remember in some of my early days with other collaborations that I had with other MSPs, there's the one person that knows how to do all the VPN setups on Juniper and Cisco and SonicWall. And so they end up getting all the tickets because, the new hire has never touched anything other than Meraki, for example. And so I think those issues of standardization also run concurrently with hey, are we going to be a generalized IT provider, work with multiple verticals, or specialize in a specific vertical or niche? And so those two things compounded obviously explode the missteps and explode the chances for, getting a wrong batch of barbecue sauce, so to speak.
Oh yeah, I think it's where you see that is, I just had a conversation with a friend the other day, and we're talking about how like when you fill out, what a job description looks like, that you should just put firewall experience. Because in general, most firewalls, you kind of got to learn the language and whatever the deal is. But it's the difference is standardization is key to customization. Or I'm sorry, standardization is key to consistency. That's what we're looking for. Customization is really that bottleneck you're talking about, right? So where you want to get, I think anybody, whether you're us as vendors and we're like bringing in new products and we're trying to make them consistent across the board, it's you got to standardize 80-90% the best you can, but there's always going to be those things you customize. You just try to keep those to a minimum because that's really where you start digging into those heavy labor hours. And I mean, back in the day when you're talking with IT glue, like your days, like we had nothing documented, let alone like process and procedures. Customer data was almost non-existent. It was typically in somebody's head.
Really? Michael Thomas saying, shout out to the WRT54G. Yeah. And sometimes we'd flash it with Tomato. Sometimes we'd flash it with other firmware because it unlocked all these capabilities. But those days are bygones, no doubt. Indeed.
Oh, no. Well, I'll tell you how bygone it is. I mean, I remember in the Cisco days, like one of my first questions when I was looking to hire a Cisco engineer was, do you code or do you use the GUI? And if they said I use the GUI, I pretty much tried to end that conversation as fast as possible. Because in the early days of that GUI, people really didn't know all the back end hooks that it was putting in and how difficult it was to pull that out. Where the guys that actually sat down and wrote the code, they knew exactly what was happening when it was happening. Now it's pretty much all GUI, and we just live with the back end hooks whether we know them or not.
Oh man, that reminds me that at some point I too was a Cisco iOS snob. So I think you eventually start to prefer simplicity, and I think this is kind of one of the things you realize as things get more complex. And I remember Paul Dipple in a conversation years ago, he was saying, "Yeah, people like having black belts in unnecessary complexity." So it just reminds me that it's a constant reminder of just, hey, simplify, make things easier for yourself. One of the other things ChatGPT talked about here was this idea of community and competition. And community is one that I know you feel strongly about because we see this in the channel all the time. MSPs are so friendly with each other. Vendors are so friendly with each other. The community that exists between vendors and MSPs is incredible. and yet somehow we managed to all coexist. And there's, yeah, in some cities there's going to be a little competition and so on. Um, but I think if you have to pull up to 30,000 feet, yeah, you would say the same thing about barbecues. Like you'll just, make a blanket statement. I love barbecue. I love the community. And it's one of the reasons I think you see people kind of never leave the channel is really the community. But what are your thoughts on community and the channel?
The community in the channel is like I've said it 1,000 times, and I'll say it probably the entire time I'm doing this. Is we're in such an oddball group of community that you can literally walk up to any one of us at any trade show, whether you're direct competition or not, and say, "Hey, can you help me?" And our everybody in the room, everybody's first response is, "Tell me what's going on. Let me figure out if I can help you." Because I guarantee you, if I can, I know somebody that does. Right?
Mm,
That is just our general attitude, and I think we see it now with on especially on the vendor side, right? Like we see the vendors now diving more in community, understanding the investment in, you know, not just our product, but how do we make the MSP a more functional thing? Because I mean, it's something like 60,000 MSPs just in the U.S. and less than what 50% of them supposedly are profitable, and it's the numbers are all over the board. So the community helping each other is where you really find, I think, the heartbeat and the essence of who we are.
yeah, truly. Aaron Hawk, an MSP from Australia who came to PAX 8 Beyond this week, we sat down for a quick catch up, and we got to chatting quite a lot back in the day when I was in IT Glue, and I'm going back 6 years, 7 years now. But he pulled up a WhatsApp message. We hadn't communicated directly for a while, but he had a couple pictures to send me, and they were pictures from DattoCon 2018, when IT Glue had won the Best in Show award and the Best Integrated Solution award. And I was up on stage receiving the award, and guess who was handing those out? It was Christine Gassman, who is now at Middle
Oh, yep.
Protector. And it was Andrea Ayala, who actually now works with me on the community team at ScalePad. And so it was kind of like this very interesting walk through history of like, yeah, wow, we've been around the same people for so many years. And of course, a lot of the folks that are in different companies now have perhaps at some point worked together. So that camaraderie and, that willingness to help, I think has really transferred into the industry as a whole. And I love it. I feel the same way that you do. And I think helping is in our nature. I think it's more difficult to say no and try to purposely not help somebody than that is to actually help them. But
And that's why I use a word, and I don't know whether it's popular or not. It's, I grew up in Oklahoma. Sometimes I use words that aren't necessarily appropriate, but I use the word servitude. I believe our industry is one of, we're looking to serve others. We're looking to help others, right? And that servitude attitude that we have towards each other, right? Because I mean, Christine called me right now and be like, "Tim, I need some help," and I'd be like, "I'm on with Luis. Give me, a few minutes, and then I'm there." Right? That's just how we are as a community.
mm,
MSPs are the same way, right? Like I'm in Kansas City. You can't swing a rubber chicken and not hit an MSP in Kansas City, right? It's just we have quite a few,
hold
but
on, hold
there's
on.
very
I'm just taking out my notepad. You can't swing a rubber chicken.
but the thing is most of us know each other. Most of us will, if we got a client that is important to us and there's something that we just don't have the ability to do, it's never a hesitation because, like you say, like you're talking about 2018. Well, think about engineers jump, leaders jump, managers jump. You build those relationships and you build that community. So it's nothing for us to reach out to somebody and say, "Hey, I don't have the expertise in this world. I'd love to figure out something with you to help my client out and to make sure this is fair on both sides." And just about everybody will jump at the chance to do that just because they're there to help.
This is so true. And that's just, a couple of experiences on the vendor side for me. But, as an MSP, my journey started back in 2005, 2006. And I've known folks ever since those days that are still, close friends and great acquaintances. And anytime I see them, there's obviously a brotherly embrace and all that stuff. And so Uh, I hope it continues, I guess is the best way I can put it. And I know that the industry changes a lot over time, and that kind of brings me to this next piece, which was adaptability and innovation. I, for the most part, I'm a plain Jane when it comes to barbecue. I like brisket. I don't even put barbecue sauce on my brisket. And maybe you're gonna disown me now for that comment, but I like the plain taste, and so I don't know how recipes are necessarily evolving in the barbecue world, but holy moly, are we ever evolving and innovating in the IT space, no doubt. And so along with that change comes, figuring out how to learn how to change, making sure that you're in the right room, listening to the right things, and around the right people. Like it's really hard to be under a rock in this industry and not miss out on big pivots potentially, or even as a result, put your business in danger, your clients in danger. And I know you've been through your own bit of change and innovation. You're a renaissance man, Tim. You continually reinvent yourself. So
That's called ADHD. That's what that's called. That's called. I got to move on. I got to do things that are. That's why I like companies and I like the industry, because there's always something to learn or new. Now with barbecue, I will tell you, these are. It's like the. I'm probably not going to be able to say the word. The wine Sauvignats. Is that how they say it?
Sauvignon Blanc.
Um, yeah. So the nuances that they have in their palate, right?
Mm,
I don't have those. I know what I like, what tastes good, things of that nature. And when you get something that's so great and they just keep alternate little bits and all that, barbecue same way. What wood are you using? How much you use? How much spice you use? Things like that. So not using barbecue sauce or using it's one way or the other. I take a bite of a steak, and if I can eat a steak without anything on it, then that's the way I prefer it. I think, but that's where you get to this to turn the corner. That's where you get to proactiveness, right? When you hit a certain level, you got to become proactive. What's next? What's there to help, right? So I think
mm,
in the MSP world, it's how do you get rid of the noise, the constant fires that you have to put out every day, so you can actually go look at additional things that can help your clients. How do you do the research? Like I know everybody's on the AI bandwagon, and we know that I just came from an AI company. Um, our data was controlled. PIA's data was very much controlled. What was in that data and who entered it into that model. The thing that's worrying me is as I'm watching some of this stuff, it's like I'm just thinking like there's such a massive amount of security risk in it. It's like I seen a commercial the other day for Gemini saying, "Hey, go read through my emails and let me know what's important, who I need to respond to." Okay, well, I just gave it complete access to all my emails. What if there's sensitive data in there? What if
yeah.
I got an email on my kid's health or something like that? Like, who's controlling the security and the language, what's going into these large language models that are supposedly helping us? Great. I want the help all day long, but if it means I got to spend $20,000 in 5 years cleaning up my person, like who Tim Coach is, I don't really want it.
Yeah, it was interesting. I had a good friend from here in Vancouver, Dayton Turner, from UMA, and he came on and he works on special projects for UMA and stuff like that. And so obviously they're dealing with AI projects and things like that. And we actually had the conversation about it's interesting how at 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, that Apple has been very late to the AI conversation, even though they've been doing AI-ish things for quite a while. And then this week during their WWDC conference, they came out with a bunch of updates and some of the stuff that's landing later this year on Apple Intelligence. And I think one of the interesting advantages that Apple has is, of course, the hardware ecosystem. So a lot of what they're going to end up doing is on-device processing, and of course, you're going to, in some cases, need to send stuff to the cloud. But Apple is very privacy centric and privacy first. And so they'll ask the user if they want to send this information, and it'll tell you what kind of data is leaving your device, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems that these, I guess, principles that Apple has around privacy are perfectly reasonable for the delay in getting, jumping on the bandwagon. And I think you can't fault them for doing it the right way. And I hope it stays that way, of course. But I thought that was interesting, and I think it's an area for MSPs to consider equally seriously because, if we just jump on the bandwagon for the sake of being first, or a client that asks about AI, you just jump in and you don't understand the ramifications. You don't have governance and policies in place to understand what's happening with data. The client themselves don't understand, what's happening with data. Obviously, you open everybody up for trouble. So
Well, I
innovation.
just read. I was on reading today, and Elon Musk is saying when Apple does this, he's like, there will be no Apple. Like, you will not be able to bring your phone into any of his facilities. He believes it's a security breach. Now, granted, that's Elon Musk, and granted, we're talking about Apple, and it's yet to be seen what that actually looks like. But I know people that still won't have Alexa in their house to play music, and I'm like, if anybody really wants to listen to the chaos that goes in my house with a teenager and a college kid, then have at it. But it's Alexa's there all the time. As you know, I just transferred over to an iPhone, which unfortunately I have to admit that I absolutely love. Um, but the ability to just give a command, and I don't want to say it because my phone, of course, will activate and take notes has been that's been a game changer for me. The ability to say, hey, set an alarm or make a reminder or take a note on this. And it's helped somewhat focus me in my world of, I know I was thinking about last night. I was sitting there, I was like, I know I have a meeting at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I'm looking through my emails and I can't find that meeting. And I went to the notes on the iPhone, and sure enough, it was like I had made a note that I had a meeting at 9 a.m. this morning. So it's been helpful, but we always have things listening to us, and I think the sooner we realize that and figure out how to manage the security around it, the better off we're going to be.
Yeah, the comment you made about, if Alexa wants to hear the nonsense that goes on in this house, they can have it. And a client of mine, with the MSP years ago, I remember we were talking about email security and getting them to update all their passwords from some legacy, 6 character passwords that they'd been using for decades before that. And I remember the principal of this company saying to me, if they want my emails, they can have them. There's nothing in my emails. And I think at the time it was interesting to go through the conversation of, okay, well, let's stop for a second and imagine a scenario where somebody gets into your email. What might they do? And so this was me kind of asking probing questions to see if they understood what possible, things could happen. And they'll look through some data. They're looking for sensitive information. Okay, great. Sensitive information. Let's go there. So what if you've been having a conversation with a client about a deposit for a big project, and you exchange bank information, and now they know they can just simply send an email to that person, say, by the way, we just updated our bank details for the next, progress deposit on this project. Please send it here. And they go ahead and send that. Now you have no recourse, and of course they did it through your email, which means you're kind of on the hook, psychologically to your client. They've consider you responsible for that. And if it's it's an amount of money that you can't recover from, that puts you in a real serious situation. Now let's look at, okay, so cyber security insurance should pay for that. Okay, great. Let's look at the security insurance policy. Here they state that if you're not doing X number of things in your environment, that they're going to disallow the claim. And so what are those things? Secure passwords, 14 carat, whatever. Some of the insurance policies, of course, we joke about how insurance has driven more cybersecurity change than any other initiative in our industry. And of course, MFA or whatever. And so it would very quickly change the dynamic of the conversation. But my point is, there was sort of this interesting unknown. The person didn't even realize what was around the corner with access to emails. And I feel like we're in a bit of the same situation with AI. And you heard Malcolm Gladwell at the PAX 8 Beyond conference as well. He kind of joked that if we think we know what AI is possible of, we're completely clueless. We have no clue.
Yeah.
Like, it's just completely
Yeah.
outside of our level of comprehension at this stage.
Well, once that thing gets full unrestricted access, I think it's going to be very interesting what can actually pop out of that. And it's, we go, I wanted to go back to that conversation because it was like, you're talking about sending banking information through email. I remember years ago, and a couple of different pieces into this statement, but years ago, one of the MSPs that I was rebuilding at the time, we had installed this program that the only way to pay us was through ACH. That was it. And if you didn't, there was like a 15% charge on top of your. So we incentivized to get that ACH, right? Because at the time it was amazing, one, that we waited to get paid. And then two, that we only got paid on the first of the month. It's like, okay, all from now until I tell you to stop, all new contracts pay on the 15th. Let's bring money in more than just once a month, right? There's a crazy idea. But then we started out and it was like we started going, it was going well, and people were changing information. It was like, man, this is so great. But then in a leadership meeting one day, somebody was like, I wonder how we do that. And then, like, what do you mean, how do we do that? How do we get banking? How do we get ACH information? And then we go talk to the person in the front office that's responsible for that. And it's like, oh, we either get it through email or I send them a paper and they fill it out. And back in the day, they fax it back, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then everybody like froze and was like, no more. Like, because at that time we didn't have really enough security built around anything to secure that information. So we went to the point of we're still doing ACH, but you have to call us or we'll call you is what we did. We called you, and then our asset will verify everything. And then what we'll do is we'll actually send you a push notification. Hey, we're going to send the ACH out on the 3rd. So we gave them some, hey, I got a paycheck. I got a big project paying on the 10th. If you could allow us a little, love and a little extension, we'd love that. But we just, because we didn't know how to deal with it, but we knew that paper and email was a horrible idea. We just went to doing it via phone calls.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think even today you still see companies taking a credit card over the phone, and the person on the other side in maybe 90% of the cases, and I'm just throwing numbers around, but I've seen it with my own eyes to know that it happens more often than I'd like it to happen, are just jotting that credit card number down, a little notepad of sticky notes, and that card number is going to probably sit there for a few days or weeks or until the notepad runs out. And so there's some, and ironically, PCI compliance, which everybody is required to have if they're dealing with any kind of credit cards, is a self assessment. And so I remember businesses that I was supporting getting these forms from their merchant credit card provider saying, oh, you need to self attest that you're compliant with PCI. People just go through and they don't even know what they're answering. They're just checking the things off. And fortunately, I think IT providers are more and more involved these days with those things, but this is the level of just non-understanding, I guess. And so what you don't know can actually be the reason for your downfall in the future in that business. If they ever, had a data leak of any kind, of course, they're going to come knocking and be like, well, show us how you were actually dealing with the separation of your networks, with your credit card machines, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, we didn't know we had to do that. Well, you said in your self-assessment that you were.
Well, that's
Claim
even
denied.
if you remember. If you remember, it was like back before we got really like. It's horrible to say this, but keep in mind, everybody, we're going back a few years, right? This isn't yesterday, but it was also a lot of us didn't know when you did have an incident that you weren't supposed to touch the hardware or whatever was compromised because the people that were coming in to investigate it, they needed that. So a lot of us that were either re-imaging over the old hardware or just completely rebuilding it, we were literally destroying the evidence unknowingly. Like we're just trying to get the business up. I think that's where we've seen a few of them. I think Datto probably as one of the forefront runners. The ability to spin up a server and put it on the network while you're taking
Right.
the compromised equipment off the network to do what you got to do. That's where I think we really started seeing the ability and the seriousness of, okay, I'm no longer trying to just recover data. I need to get the business up and running while I figure out whatever the incident was.
Yeah. It's complex. Like when I've a couple of times in my lifetime, I've dealt with situations where an expert had to get involved to make sure the data was preserved a certain way and that no changes were happening. And none of it happens ill intentioned, of course. We're always just trying to help, but sometimes it's counterproductive to some of the requirements or the ability to get better information after the fact. So no doubt. Well, let me perhaps shift a bit of the angle to more channel chiefy type of things. As a channel chief, and you've been at a few companies over the years now in your role as a channel chief. What have you figured out is sort of one of the key primary relationship building, and I won't call it a tactic, but just because I don't want to sound like you're strategically building relationships, which is not what I mean. But what have you found leads to the best relationships with both MSPs or other vendors?
For me, it's always just been accessibility, being open and honest, right? Accessibilities. Of course, there's things that your company's doing, progressing, things like that are confidential and you have to keep. But really, you know it's creating that relationship in the industry that you're a trustworthy person, that you're representing a trustworthy company, and like I've always like now as I contemplate, am I going to another company that just does a service or a couple of services to help the MSP out, or am I going to a company that does a sell through product, right? For me, it's always finding value in, and it's weird, right? Because you and I have a sauce that not everybody in our position has. And that's because we did it multiple times for multiple years, right? And that doesn't, I'm not trying to take anything away from people who haven't done it, but you know as well when you're talking to someone and you're using their language, not your own language, or you're not trying to spin some new word in the industry or some new play, that comes with trust because they know your pain,
Yeah,
right? I
or
mean,
you share the jagged edges of suffering
yeah,
and self-flagellation.
it is because that's the thing is like you and I, we know, and it can be a little judgy. I'm just going to say it now. We'll expose the dirty truth. If you come to me and you say I've got MSP experience, and I look at your resume and it's 6 months, that means you didn't hack it. You didn't deal with the pain
Yeah.
that comes with multiple 0 days, that comes with the clients, that comes with the people, that comes with everything involved around it. Maybe you got a better opportunity and great for you. But I mean, it's MSP is that's just a pain and a love and an experience that you gotta take on and you gotta put on your shoulders,
Oh,
right?
the hairs on my arm just stood because you made me remember. You just gave me you triggered the PTSD. You might remember this when Zerigo, the DNS provider, and I want to say this was 2012. They had become a very popular DNS provider because they were doing the short TTLs and it was fantastic for cutovers and some things like that. And everybody started moving their DNS over to Zerigo. And then they got hit by a denial of service attack. And because of the short TTLs, like suddenly all these DNS records started dropping off the face of the earth. And so we had every email server down, every service that was using DNS of any kind for customer was down. And they mitigated it. It took 8-10 hours, I guess. It was not until later that day that they finally sort of got through the thing. But in that space of time, like everybody was out, everybody was down, and that's the kind of stuff you just never forget.
I,
And
I
so,
remember
yeah,
I remember when I first went over to the channel. I don't know, it was maybe 4 or 5 months in. Like it wasn't like a week; it was 4 or 5 months. And my phone goes off at like 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, "What in the world?" Everybody's in the house that I know of. Um, so I pick up the phone, and it was one of the vendors for the MSP I'd left was like, "Hey, you're the last person on the escalation tree," and it's like the best feeling was, well, I'm no longer that person anymore. But then, of course, because of what we do, I was like, here, let me get you in contact with the right person that will help you out. But it was like, not trust me, not getting 4 a.m. phone calls anymore. Now it's fine if it's Europe or APAC or one of those other places that I do common business with, right? That's pretty fine. But it's like not getting the oh my god something's wrong, being woke up from that dead sleep to hear that your data center is completely offline. I don't miss those days.
Man, I have stopped myself in my tracks when I got a random phishing email from a person I didn't even know in my spam, and sometimes I'm curious. I check to see what company it is, and they might be completely clueless to this. Obviously, maybe their website got owned, and they are hosting some kind of random phishing page on there that they're not even sending emails from that domain on. But I've stopped. I've called those companies. I've said, hey, can I speak to your IT person or IT provider? There's a security concern that I want to make them aware of. And it's interesting how many people just kind of try to shut you down in that process, as if they don't believe that you're trying to help. And this has been one of the biggest frustrations in trying to help sometimes, is that people often don't want to be helped. And other times because they don't know if they can trust you in that moment, and they don't know what you're saying. If what you're saying means that they're going to give up some kind of information or connect you to somebody they shouldn't. And so I get the challenge, but once you finally get to that person, it's obvious when they realize that you were trying to help. The gratitude finally comes out, and I think every time we do that, the world becomes a tiny little bit better. When people say, faith in humanity has been restored. Those are kind of those moments for me, for sure.
No, they are those moments because it's what I used to tell the help desk people all the time. Like, listen, the first 50% of your call is being a psychologist. You're just
That's
listening.
so true.
You're just letting them get through whatever they need to get through, and about 50% through the call, you're going to get to the root. But it's okay, right? Just keep in mind you're there to help. They're not mad at you, right? They're just upset with the situation. They're trying to get through it, and I think that's where that's where we get to this whole like servitude and helping people thing. It's I've
Mm.
always stood by the fact that do what's right by the people, and everything will else take care of itself. Now, there's been a few MSPs that I've gone to that I've been rebuilding, and they're like they want a nickel and dime for everything, right? That's just been their pattern, right? We came from a time and hourly type of thing, and into this model where we charge a price per person, and that's where they're at. And I'm like, that's not building the relationship, because trust me, the last person that someone in need wants to hear, the last thing they want to hear is there may be a service charge associated, right? And it's like when the tech's got to do that, you take that off the tech, they're way happier because they don't have to have that conversation. And it's like you just worry about helping them. It's my job to worry about anything billing after the fact. And if I haven't gone through the contract to explain to the client what is and what isn't billable, well, that's on me. But if you do what's right by the people, the back end will always take care of itself.
Recently, I was chatting with my friend Martin DeRosier, who's now a regional president for Lyra, and they're a big roll-up part of Evergreen. And Martin and I both worked together at Fully Managed years ago, and we had a chief of strategy, David Reeve, who sadly passed away not too long ago. But he was one of those guys that really inculcated in the company and everybody around him this idea of making responsible decisions. And and this decision framework that he often talked about is something I took with me to my next MSP, and I talk about it all the time, sort of this idea of decision empowerment. But he would say, if it's the right thing for the client, if it's the right thing to do, and it's the right thing for the company, make the decision. Don't get stuck trying to get an approval. And in fact, recently I saw a YouTube video of a company CEO, big company CEO, where based on the level of person in the org chart, they can make that type of decision even where money is on the table up to X amount of dollars. So like a senior director could spend up to $1,000 to solve a problem without having to escalate it. Because the whole point is being client centric in that scenario and giving people the ability to solve an issue or challenge without creating the bottleneck. And so I think it's an interesting strategy for MSPs to consider, because like if you say, okay, help desk, if there's an issue here, a part you have to replace, something that you have to buy to fix a problem, a piece of software, like whatever it is, right? You are authorized to spend $50 or $100 or whatever the number is without having to get approval. You obviously have to log the issue, report it to your manager, all those things, so there can be a debrief and a learning opportunity from all that stuff. But I thought it was just so brilliant. What a great idea to remove a bit of the bottleneck and kind of the really truly empower your people to make the best decision possible, right?
Absolutely. And I think that stacks on, like we're talking about, like, our careers, which, it's weird that we have this bit of alignment other than the fact that you're, this world-class singer. Our background are close in, we both have a military background. So very process procedure driven people. Right. And then part of that military background has taken us from like this rigid, the beatings will continue until morale improves, to let's empower our people to do
Mm.
what they want to do. Right. And you and Juan actually talked a bit about this. It's, when you empower people to do what they want to do, and give them the ability and be transparent and give them the ability to do what's right. And, there's certainly ticky marks that have to be along the way, right? You have to be cost conscious. You have to be understanding where the things are going. But people love that. And I tell people all the time, it's, when you start going from the doing the work all the time to you're managing people that are doing the work, till you're managing budgets, till you're doing X and Y and Z, and you're in these big positions for these companies, knowing what you're great at is immensely important. Knowing what you suck at is just as important.
Yeah.
And like, people will come to me and ask me, like, Tim, like, what's the key to your success? And I'll tell you, it's building a great team around the things that I suck at. That's what it is. And then I bring in, Joe and I have been business partners for 15 years, right? I can tell you right now, and Joe would tell you right now, the things that he sucks at. So it's just, you build a team around the things that people want to do and the things that they suck at. And man, you come up with these massive teams that just accelerate so fast because everybody's doing what they love. And I think that's a key to, success overall as a person and as, a quote unquote leader, if you will.
I 100% agree. And similar to your parallel there, I've been reading The Daily Stoic. The Daily Stoic is a modern day philosopher, Ryan Holiday, who takes old philosopher quotes and then contextualizes them for today's challenges and issues. Shout out to any of my Stoic followers out there. I know there's a bunch of people that often approach me and be like, man, I love that Stoicism stuff. And today's entry was super interesting. Today's entry was this entry is called "Try the Other Handle," and it's interesting. It's the quote from Epictetus goes: "Every event has two handles, one by which it can be carried, and one by which it can't. If your brother does you wrong, don't grab it by his wronging." Because this is the handle incapable of lifting it. Instead, use the other handle, that he is your brother, that you were raised together, and that you will have hold of the handle that carries. And so this idea of like, there's obviously two ways to approach every issue, and if one of them is to always put the bad interpretation, the victimization, the victimhood, I guess is the best way, then that's a handle that you can't carry the issue by. And so I it was just so powerful to put it in that
See,
additional bit of context.
so on a book level, that relates to me on two different books, right? Book number one is, I love Larry Little. I think he's a great guy. He writes great books, but he's got one, it's called Make a Difference. And what it does is it simply identifies listening styles, right? You get an animal because everybody gets an animal with everything, right? So, but understanding, like my listening style is a quote unquote lion, meaning I want the pleasantries, I want the relationship, but when it comes to the work stuff, right? Like, let's get to the meat of it so I can make a decision and move on with life,
Mm.
right? That's what I'm really good at. But if I'm going to an engineer that has to develop a really in-depth integrated system with multiple other systems, maybe they're a camel or a turtle, which means that the way they hear is different than the way I hear. So I can't talk to them like I talk to me. I have to say, okay, well, because I know, I can point to a guy right now. I called him the wizard, right? This guy, he needed details. So I had to speak to him on a detail level. And what I found is I was less frustrated as his boss or his manager, leader, whatever word you want to use, because I understood how to go into that first conversation for him to get as much information as he needed to hear. Now that wasn't Tim changing Tim, right? And the way I hear and the way I do things, that was me changing my communication pattern so that he was receiving it in the way that he received it. And that's how he was wired. Now, that also leads to the second book, which, a gentleman suggested me years ago and has done me like mountains and mountains of greatness, which is Crucial Conversations. And a long time ago, I used to be much more of an aggressive personality, right? So it was much more of a react than a think about it. It's that whole instead of asking questions, I would just react. And then all of
Mm.
a sudden I'd be like, oh, I'm in the wrong. I got to go apologize because I didn't ask the right questions to get to the real answer. So Crucial Conversations is that book that says, I may be the one that's looking for the outcome, but if I'm looking for that outcome from you, I have to present it to you in a way that you hear it, and I have to present it in a way that you're comfortable receiving it. And as soon as that conversation, especially if it's an uncomfortable conversation, right? And I see you physically shutting down to me, now it's my job to get you back into that, that safe space, so to speak, the open space where you're willing to hear and you're willing to have a conversation with me. And that's what Crucial Conversations is about. And the thing that I love about that book is you can use it in every aspect of your life. You're having a problem with your child and communicating them, and they're just shut down to you. That book will help you figure out how to open up. You go into business contracts. I've asked, I've suggested to people that are going in trying to renegotiate salaries,
Mhm.
and it's like, listen, this you got to understand how they're receiving it, and you've got to keep them in a favorable position of hearing you. And if you can't do that, then they'll shut down early.
I'm gonna post both of those books in the comments of the live stream because I think they're great. I have not read them, but you've talked about Crucial Conversations a lot, and I think those are one of the things that I don't know if there's maybe an age factor to our need to process across conversations across generations and things like that change, because I feel like there are certain things that can be said around people my age, for example, that I'd never have to explain, or that I know people will never take the wrong way, or that culturally or generationally can just be said, right? And so it's interesting to approach it also perhaps from that perspective. Not to say that one generation is wrong and the other one's right, simply that, hey, we're different, we're evolving,
Mm-hmm.
things are changing, the world is different around us, and so on. And I love this idea of Crucial Conversations. I've put it on my list as well. The book I'm reading right now, which I talked to you about when we were in Denver, is this book called Principles by Ray Dalio. And Ray Dalio, a big finance guy, had a successful company called Bridgewater. And Principles is basically his life's work of figuring out, articulating the principles in both work and life that helped him create the culture inside of Bridgewater that he felt was the culture needed to succeed at the level that he wanted the company to succeed. And I'm not even into the part of the book yet where the principles are being talked about. He's just kind of giving a bit of the backstory of his life and some of the conditions and situations that led him to be interested in some parts of psychology and so on. And so I highly recommend it. So it's a big one, but worth the read. And I think it kind of puts all these ideas on the table for MSPs, small and large, to think about. Especially as you're trying to build a culture, MSPs that are small, for example, have this interesting challenge that career pathing is difficult because in a 6-person organization, there's not a lot of places to go. And sometimes as a small 6-person, 7-person MSP owner, you have nothing to offer to your team in terms of like a vertical career ladder, so to speak. And so it's interesting to build a culture around the things that are non-negotiable in the business, the things you're never going to do, the things you are going to do. Juan talks about a lot about the things that on the second time around, the things that he was not willing to do, and that was kind of the guardrails for being a much more successful business the second time around. So
That's
highly
what
recommended
actually,
if you like the philosophical reads.
that's already popped it up, and I got two ahead of you. So that's I was lucky enough early on to have a mentor that was heavy into, like, we're having a book club at work, right? That was his gig, right? And the majority of my collection is still from him, and it's one of those things where books and art, authors and art, right? You get things from something, you get more from another book, right? But so I just happened was talking with your Dan at PAX as I was wandering around a bit lost, and we were talking about books, and obviously I got some time to pick up some reading, and he recommended a couple. So yours will be third on the list. He beat you by two in front of it, which is crossing the chasm and Inside the Tornado was the ones that Dan recommended. So I just ordered those today, so yours will be quickly behind that one.
Yeah, those are great as well. On more back to the channel chiefy things. It's interesting. I've noticed a bit of, and again through the stoicism mentality, I've noticed that the industry that we're in is so hyper focused on the future. Like, and you see everybody at the end of the year, oh, the trends for next year, and even 5 years, and everybody wants to polish out, the crystal ball and talk about the future and want predictions for what's going to happen in 5 years and stuff like that. Meanwhile, we seem to be having a endemic execution issue across MSPs of many levels. You see this kind of play out. And who was it that talked about it? John Street, I think, in his keynote, he was kind of made the mention to the concept of lifestyle MSP, where maybe perhaps a few years ago it was a derogative term to say lifestyle MSP. It meant they weren't serious. Now it's kind of like a life choice. It was like, hey, no, this is kind of my way of finding balance. And I meet plenty of lifestyle MSPs that are very successful. However, even when you're a lifestyle MSP, you still have to execute, and you have to
Mm-hmm.
sell, and you have to do all these things to keep the business growing somewhat. Because the reality is, if you're not growing, you're shrinking. And even a lifestyle business has to maintain, and continue to evolve with a bit of the changing circumstances and so on. So it's not enough to just do the minimum necessary, I guess is my point.
And I
But
think
but
that's where we see the role in channel chief change, right? I mean, we've seen the role as channel chief of being the person that goes to the events. They're the speaker on stage. They have some management responsibilities, some budgetary responsibilities, things like that. Now it's turned into this thing where it's more of a holistic view, right? It's not just going to the shows. It's community. What does community look like? How are you managing community? How are you keeping your clientele involved? How are you building those relationships, right? And how are you doing that? And now we've taken it a step further, right? You guys are on the path to do that. You've certainly done a few of them, and some others are doing it out there too. But that's an educational track, right? I mean, you and I know from being in MSP, you can buy a product and put a product in, but it's probably never more than 70% configured and functioning at about 50%,
hmm,
if on a lucky day,
yeah,
right? So now all of a sudden this channel chief role, or what you see is, like VP of community and channel, or senior director of this and that, right? It's no longer just that. It's like, how do we bring in the community? How do we have a functioning program that helps our partners or brings in new partners, right? As well as, how do we educate them on not just the product but business practices? Because the vendors do have a large array of business aptitude. So, I mean, I can go out there and teach tech all day long, right? But it's like, if I'm teaching the tech, but I'm not teaching you how to apply it, how that applies to your business, how you see that drop your EBITDA or help with reducing labor costs, things of that nature, then is there really a full job there? So I think we've seen this channel chief role change quite a bit from certainly when I first started going to shows 20, 30 years ago.
yeah. And I think this is where the adaptability comes in. Back to a bit of our conversation around barbecue and IT. There's this adaptability and innovation, and we kind of started touching on this earlier. But you sometimes think there are certain things that there's nothing to innovate on, like a great brisket recipe. Like, where do you go from there if it's already great? Like, how do you innovate on that? And I think these are sort of the things that tend to surprise us a bit about the IT industry, is that we constantly are surprised by things we didn't expect could continue changing. But I remember going to or seeing this great keynote, and his name is escaping right now. He came to one of the GlueX conferences. He had been at Lego for many years, and the whole talk was about innovation. And he kind of espoused the importance of thinking about innovation in all aspects of the business, not necessarily coming up with something new, but maybe a slightly different way of doing a process, or improving on a small process that has a small 1 degree of improvement now, but a big 40 or 50 degree improvement a couple years down the road, that kind of thing. And I think that mentality of constant adaptability, constant change, you know. Continuous improvement, or just making sure you're reassessing these processes on a regular basis, can have a big flex on the business over the years, of
And
course.
fresh ways of viewing it, right? Bring in new blood, bring in new potential ways. Let's see how other industries do things, right? I mean, if we're tying this back into barbecue, there's a place that I'll say is okay down in Texas called the Salt Lick, right? And it's if you've ever been there, it's this crazy montage of a bunch of three-sided sheds that's been added to a building. But the place is so big, they actually they hired Texas Highway Patrol to do parking on the weekends. It's so insane. But I got the opportunity one time to visit with one of the sons that was running it. And he was like, in the conversation, he was like, Dad was famous for his smoking and famous for his barbecue, and that was great. He goes, but it really didn't take off until Dad passed away and Mom took over. And Mom was of Hawaiian descent. So she started adding ginger into some of the recipes, right? It's that fresh look, it's that fresh take, it's adding a new perspective to some of the things that we're doing that really help you innovate and push past where today is. I mean, you guys are a great example of that. And I'm not, I've spoken the evangelistic standpoint from ScalePad for a hot minute, but you guys continue to bring in fresh products, fresh blood, fresh ways of doing things, and then not just leaving them the way they are, but innovating them to continue on. But you're not doing that from a perspective of this little group of people know everything. You're doing it from a perspective of, hey, here's something that's really great over here. What if we added that to our under our umbrella, under our services, to really enhance that? I think we're seeing a lot of the MSPs do that now. Right now, we're getting
Mm.
rid of some of the nonsense, right? But in some of the noise that we used to have to do. But in the stance, it's adding those little bits of ingredients to what you're doing that make it better, to make it better consumable for the people. And I think that's things that we do on every level, both on the vendor side, in the MSP world, and definitely in the barbecue world.
I'll tell you, man, it is interesting how, and I see this now from the vendor side, and I think you're uniquely tuned into this as well, having been an MSP previously. And I think we get a little bit more latitude, you and I, or other folks that have been in our place, in the industry when there's an issue. And nobody's perfect. There's going to be problems. There's going to be challenges. And it seems like always in the moment that there's an issue, it feels like the issue is absolutely magnificent. The size of the sun. There is no way out. This is the worst thing that could have ever happened. And it's interesting once you finally get past that issue, improve that little process or thing that was causing a problem in the app or what have you, and you look back and it's like, yeah, it was a temporary thing, and we moved on. And so I wanted to ask you, I guess, in your travels as both an MSP and on the vendor side, I'm sure you've come across your fair share of feedback from MSPs when there's issues, when there's problems. And not to be preachy necessarily, but what has been your favorite type of engagement from an MSP when there's issues? Because I know that there's multiple ways to, light the fire under people's asses, but what are some of your favorite ways that you've seen people engage with you on issues specifically?
So I am a lover of negative feedback, and I know that may sound weird, but if you're doing it right, nobody ever tells you anything. I used to have a boss who say all the time, you do 99 things right, but people only remember the one thing you done wrong. But having an open, attitude, having a great relationship with the MSPs where you're approachable, right? Where they don't feel like they're doing that. Now there's certainly times that people will come in super hot, right? And they're mad, and you got to take that with a bit of grace, because you got to understand, they're just trying to do their own business, and something that you're providing or you're doing has caused conflict in their world. And I think the best way to do that is through relationships, which is, going to be really tough, because as you heard at PAX, Jay McBain talking about how the majority of people that are buying now want to buy via the phone. They don't want to talk to anybody, right? They just want to handle that kind of stuff. I think Rob talked about it too on stage, but it's one of those things where having the ability for people to come to you and having access to you, right? I mean, I'm sure, my contacts are probably like yours, if not, a little less than yours. Everybody in the world has my contact information. And the reason why that is because I used to always tell people, if you even think there's an issue, let me know. Don't wait to get upset. Don't wait for, your manager over in welding to get hacked off at you. Don't wait for the lady at the teller to get mad. If you hear a whisper or something, just call me and let's get ahead of it, because most of the time that's where you run into the real problems, is when you let it build up. And it builds up because nobody likes delivering bad news, because it's taken bad. So that's when you change the mindset of the news isn't good or bad, it's just news. How you react to that news is what can make or break the relationship. So even though it may be perceived for most people as a negative comment, or someone's really mad at you, I'm just taking the information because I want to fix the problem.
Yeah. You are, of course, correct. Wise and insightful as you are. Something I've been saying, it feels like all week, because it was a quote I heard a few weeks ago, is this idea that uncommunicated expectations are premeditated resentments.
See, I, I love that, right? And the reason why I love that is how many times, like it's your MSP, right? So let's kind of take your vendor days out of it, go back to the MSP days, put yourself in that mindset. Your client comes to you and they are just so mad they can't see straight because you didn't do something, and it's your job because you take care of my IT. You take care of it. And then you're like, man, what have we missed? And you're fretting, you're sweating, and you go through all this stuff. And then you start digging in the documentation, and the documentation clearly states, we don't do this so it can reduce your cost, right? The problem is with contracts, we don't continually refresh our conversations, right? You guys went out and got a company here a while back, and it talks about QBRs. Help me with the company.
Life cycle insights. Yeah.
Life cycle insights. But part of that process should be at least twice a year reviewing the contract so the expectations are met. So, and it's never the owner, right? The person that you're having the conversation with that's blown up about you aren't doing this. It's never the guy that signed the contract, right? Because the guy that signed the contract doesn't push those expectations down to the rest of them. But man, let's take that a step further. What are the expectations of success? When you come into a company as an employee, when you take on a contract as a vendor or as the client, what does success look like? Who's setting those expectations? Have you had those conversations? That expectations is such a left out conversation in our industry, and I think as a whole. right? Like I tell my son, it's, my expectation is what success looks like for you is on every Sunday night, you collect all the trash in the house. I don't care how you do it. I care about the end result. Success looks like on Monday morning, the trash can is at the curb ready for the guys to pick up. But he started doing that when he was 14. So I had to explain to him the expectation and what success looks like. If I have to do that on taking out the trash, how do you do that when you're handling these large contracts that are tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars every month? Why would you not have that conversation every month? Because it's also a way to take on additional services, possibly upsell.
Yeah.
Hey, just so you know, this is where we at when we had this conversation. You didn't want me to handle XYZ. Are we still there, or would you like to revisit putting those in your contract so that we're handling that for you?
Yeah, the irony is you wait, or you don't communicate those expectations, or you don't refresh the conversation about the contract terms or what have you, and then an issue happens, and then it's all your fault anyways, because the client's expectation is, well, we're paying for service, we should get this handled anyways. And now you want to do right by the client, and there's this idea of customer service and all these things, and so we kind of put ourselves in those situations, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So I love the idea of just it's such a mind-bending little quote to keep in mind. If you're not communicating the expectations, you will absolutely resent the situation, the person, the contract, whatever down the road, and it's not good for either side to have that resentment as part of the picture, of
And
course.
it's the same. It's the same way when, like, I don't know how many MSPs I consulted with that when it was time to do contract renewal, right? So you'll see me probably in October. I start putting out a series of videos, and they're the exact same videos for the last 10 years, and it's things that people should be doing to prepare to go into the new year, right? It always amazes me people that are afraid of doing contract renewals.
Mm. Those are tough
Why?
conversations. Yeah, they're tough conversations.
That's because they don't
We're
know where
we're ill
they don't know
prepared to
where the
talk about
relationship.
money. MSPs, we are generally ill prepared to talk about money and or raising prices, and it's contrary to the hero complex and all the things that we've all talked about for so long. Um, and this is the number one thing, anybody who is thinking about it as a business transaction will tell you. It's like, yeah, you got to have it in your contract, raise your prices, da, 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 da. And so I love that you do that as a reminder, because I think that's the kind of osmosis the industry needs in many of those situations. To just, if you hear it enough times, maybe you'll start doing it. So
One of the things I talk about when I'm having conversations with MSPs is, are you guys doing are you doing your IT budget for your clients? And they're like, what do you mean? And it's easy, right? You should know where your client's growth pattern is. That's the relationship. You should know where they are today. Like listen, you and I don't like on any level somebody coming up to us and say, hey, you need to drop $5,000 on this today because it's out of date.
yeah, the
Well,
surprises are
we all
horrible.
know they don't like doing it. Now, once you figure out like how, granted, the first two or three are a little rough. You got to figure it out if that's not a mindset that you're used to, right? But once you got those two or three, it's pretty much just replicating numbers across the board, right? You should know all of your hardware. Nowadays, I think hardware for the most part has become more of a disposable asset than it used to be. It used to be it was
Yeah,
like, I'm going to keep those laptops for 5 years. I'm
till
going
they
to
die.
keep those servers for seven, and then now it's become much more disposable of an asset because prices have come down quite a bit in what we're doing. Unless you're a Mac shop, and then those things are always a little bit more pricier because that's a different debate. But the point being is there's things as an MSP that you can do to provide immense value. Have a seat at that table, the important table, not the we're doing a project, but the important table talking about how are you going to grow your company in 3 to 5 years? Because listen, if they're saying we're going to grow X and you come in and add a third to their budget because they need all this new tech to support that and they didn't know it, how do
Mm.
you become a relationship? Where's your relationship? Why aren't you at the table?
Yeah, I feel like I had a great conversation about this recently here on the live stream. Let me think of who is it. Oh, it was Joe Markert. He was talking about how one of the things he started doing was asking his clients to bring him into one of their strategic meetings. Not all of them. Like you're not necessarily in every boardroom meeting, but once yearly, twice yearly, into their cadence. And I thought that was so insightful because I think the conversations are very different inside of the client's cadence as opposed to being expected to drive the conversation. When we come in to these conversations, there's a clear agenda that is focused on the things that the MSP wants to try and achieve. And many of those things could be focused on the business and their technology and their outcomes. But we also know that many MSPs are not at that level necessarily, and they're stuck just trying to get, the baseline of security and hardware raised to a acceptable level. And so a lot of it is just fighting with the approvals and the quotes and the projects and the budgeting and so on. But I thought it's so insightful to go to the other side and just be bringing me into your meeting. I want to hear sort of how you guys are talking about some of these issues and challenges. And of course, they may temper some of the discussion. Maybe you pop in for 20 minutes and you leave so they can have their private discussions or what have you. But it's an interesting strategy to try. And now that we're halfway through the year, a lot of companies might start putting into the schedule their year-end budgeting, their et cetera, et cetera. So it's a great time to throw that idea out there into clients and be like, hey, if you consider it, I'd love to come in into one of your strategic meetings for a specific amount of time so we can talk about some long-term planning. And I think every company should have a bit of this long-term planning cadence. And then, of course, the immediacy of all the other things happening. It's really tough to get derailed by an email issue when you're trying to have a 3-year strategic budgeting discussion. So, but my email's not working. Why should I give you any money for the 3-year refresh of our network hardware? And so it's really nice to just change the context of where you're sitting in that relationship to have those conversations. Man, I've kept you long enough, Tim. Normally, I try to keep these to a maximum of 1 hour, but time is just flying by because you're so fun to talk to. I'm looking forward to my Kansas City barbecue pilgrimage that I'm doing at the end of July. I will report back to the internets how that was. And just for the sake of comment and discussion and maybe lighting a fire, what is the absolute best barbecue in Kansas City? You can only name one.
For me, hands down, Oklahoma Joe's. But you got to go to the gas station. The originals are always the best. The gas station location, Oklahoma Joe's. I think they now call it Kansas City Joe's because Kansas City, but that's the number one for me.
All right, you can fight Tim in the comments if that's not your preferential barbecue spot, but I'll report back. I'll have a full report on all the delicious stuff that we tried. Tim, it's always so great to chat with you, man. I appreciate you hanging out with me for a little bit. Hopefully we can do it again. Aaron Hayes jumped in saying great conversation. Appreciate you, Aaron. It's always good to get these conversations happen casually because I feel more little things come out in the nuance of just
so you know Aaron, right?
I don't know that I do.
Aaron is our friend of ours from Abyss, so the networking group, right? And here's Aaron. Like you look at Aaron, and he's just he's got that great beard, and he's so dapper. But Aaron is a marketing genius. So if you're ever looking for anybody to understand how to do marketing or talk about marketing and MSP, Aaron would be a great resource. I'd recommend him any day of the week, and you guys would get along fabulously.
Well, Aaron, I think Tim may have just volunteered you for one of the upcoming MSP Confidentials. They were thinking of doing a marketing tactics, wrong answers only conversation, because I think we misstep a lot, and you'd like to think that MSPs learn from the history of their predecessors, but I don't know that that's always true. We find ourselves making a lot of the same mistakes and proving to ourselves that that it was in fact not the right way to do that. But I think it'd be a fun conversation because I think we've all seen a number of missteps along the way. Well, I appreciate you tuning in, Aaron. If you're out in the UK, man, I appreciate you also hanging out this late. We're going to be down there with Brooke Lee in the Cheshire event if you're at the network group. And so we'll be down there July 2nd and 3rd. So look forward to seeing you. Please definitely say hello. Aaron, I have lots of wrong answers, he says. And I feel like this, this is what I love the most about this industry is that this is where that community thing comes in. We're always so willing to share our missteps and where we went wrong. And there's always some kind of story from the trenches, whether it's marketing, whether it's, in my case, having our synced a drive in the wrong direction and erasing the customer's production data. I don't know why I keep admitting to that, but that's neither here nor there. Tim, so good to have you, man. I will have to do a follow-up conversation after the barbecue pilgrimage. And thanks everybody for tuning in. We're here every week on Fridays at 12 Pacific, at 3 p.m. Eastern. You're a scholar and a gentleman, and I hope to see you very, very soon.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you having me on.